The stagecoach rattled to a stop, dust swirling in the afternoon sunlight of Montana Territory. Eleanor Barnes clutched her worn leather satchel, containing everything she owned in the world, and stepped down into a future she'd risked everything to find. She had come with nothing but hope in her pocket and promises in her heart, but sometimes promises are made to be broken, and hope can shatter faster than glass on stone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled violently as it traversed the final miles of the journey, wheels churning up clouds of rusty dust that stained the Montana sky. Eleanor Barnes gripped the edge of her seat, knuckling white beneath her threadbare gloves. 6 days of travel had left her exhausted, her simple grey dress wrinkled and travel-worn despite her best efforts to appear presentable. Clearwater coming. Up, folks! The driver's voice boomed from outside. Last stop before Bitterroot Valley. Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat. Clearwater. The name that had danced through her dreams for months now, ever since the first letter had arrived at her cramped Philadelphia boarding house. She removed the envelope from her pocket, folded and unfolded so many times the creases had begun to tear, and traced her finger over the careful penmanship of Matthew Wilson, cattle rancher, and her soon-to-be husband. The other passengers, a wool merchant and his wife, regarded her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "You'll be getting off here then, miss?" the woman asked, straightening her expensive hat. "Yes, ma'am, my fiancé is waiting for me." The word still felt strange on Eleanor's tongue. Fiancé, a man she had never met, but had exchanged a dozen. Heartfelt letters with over the past 4 months, all alone, so far from home. The woman clucked her tongue. "You're a brave soul." Brave wasn't the word Eleanor would have chosen. Desperate, perhaps. After losing her seamstress position when the factory closed, and facing eviction from her boarding house, the matrimonial advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like providence. Rancher seeks bride, 32 years of age. Established homestead, in Montana Territory. Seeking companion of good character and gentle disposition, must be willing to assist with household duties. Photograph appreciated but not required. Eleanor hadn't sent a photograph. She couldn't afford to have one taken. Instead, she'd sent a letter describing herself honestly, her skills as a seamstress, her ability to keep accounts from her time working at the mercantile, her fondness for reading, her inexperience with ranch life, but willingness to learn. She had mentioned her parents passing from influenza 3 years prior, leaving her to fend for herself in a city growing more crowded and less forgiving by the day. What she hadn't mentioned was the state of her finances, that her last dollar had gone to purchase the stagecoach ticket, that the simple grey dress she wore was her only good garment, painstakingly mended and pressed for this occasion. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, jolting Eleanor from her thoughts. She gathered her small leather satchel, all she had been able, to bring, and carefully tucked Matthew's letters inside. "Good luck to you, dear," the merchant's wife said, her eyes softening momentarily. "Thank you, ma'am." Eleanor nodded politely and stepped down from the coach, her worn boots meeting the dusty main street of Clearwater. The town was smaller than she had imagined. A single thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings, most still bearing the raw look of frontier construction. A general store, a saloon, a small church with a crooked steeple, a livery stable. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, eyeing the stagecoach with mild interest. Eleanor stood beside her satchel, the Montana sun beating down on her uncovered head, and searched the faces for Matthew Wilson. His letters had described him as tall with brown hair and a beard, but that description could fit half the men in town. "You look lost, ma'am." A young boy of perhaps 12 approached, chewing on a piece of straw. "Stage don't come through often. Are you meeting someone?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, trying to keep the nervousness from her voice. "Mr. Matthew Wilson. Do you know him?" The boy's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Wilson? Sure do. His ranch is about 3 miles outside town. You want me to fetch him for you? He comes most Saturdays for supplies. Today is Saturday, Eleanor said, her pulse quickening. Is he here? The boy nodded. Saw him at Peterson's store about an hour ago. He squinted down the street. That's him there coming out of the gunsmith's. Eleanor followed his gaze and her breath caught. A man was emerging from a shop down the street, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn duster coat. Even from this distance, she could see he matched the sparse description from the letters. Brown, hair and beard, both sun-lightened in places, and a purposeful way of moving that suggested confidence. "Thank you," she whispered to the boy, who shrugged and scampered off. Eleanor smoothed her dress with trembling hands and picked up her satchel. This was the moment she had travelled over 1,000 miles for, the beginning of her new life. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. Matthew Wilson was examining a box of ammunition when he sensed someone approaching. He looked up, his expression initially neutral, then questioning as he saw Eleanor walking directly toward him. "Mr. Wilson?" Her voice was steady despite the riot of nerves in her stomach. "Yes?" He studied her face, no recognition in his eyes. "I'm Eleanor Barnes, from Philadelphia." She waited for the dawn of understanding. It came slowly, his brow furrowing before his eyes widened. "Miss Barnes, you're here?" "Yes." She smiled tentatively. "I received your letter confirming our arrangement. I came as soon as I could." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else Eleanor couldn't quite name. Discomfort, perhaps. "Miss Barnes, He cleared his throat, glancing around as if searching for a way out of the conversation. "I wasn't expecting you so soon. Your last letter said any time after April would be suitable," she reminded him gently. "It's now the middle of May." "Yes, of course." He nodded, still seeming disoriented by her presence. His eyes travelled over her, taking in her plain dress, her worn satchel, the clear lack of any other belongings. His expression hardened slightly. "Where is the rest of your luggage?" Heat crept into Eleanor's cheeks. "This is all I brought. I thought it best to travel light." Matthew's jaw tightened. His gaze returned to her face, assessing now rather than welcoming. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private." He led her across the street to a small cafe attached to the hotel. Inside, the dimly lit space was mostly empty, with only an older couple seated near the window. Matthew selected a table in the far corner and pulled out a chair for Eleanor with stiff courtesy. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. "Coffee?" Matthew finally asked. "Yes, please." Her mouth was dry with apprehension. He signaled to a waitress, ordered 2 coffees, then turned back to Eleanor. His handsome face was guarded now, so different from the warmth she had imagined behind his written words. "Miss Barnes," he began after the coffee arrived, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Eleanor's heart sank. "What kind of misunderstanding, Mr. Wilson?" He stirred his coffee slowly, not meeting her eyes. "In your letters you described yourself as a woman of modest means. I took that to mean—" He paused, searching for words. "You took it to mean I wasn't destitute," Eleanor finished for him, her voice quiet but direct. His eyes snapped to hers, surprised by her frankness. "I have worked hard to establish my ranch, Miss Barnes. It's beginning to prosper, but I need a wife who can bring something to the marriage. Some funds to expand the operation, perhaps, or at least a proper trousseau." "I see." Eleanor's chest tightened, but she kept her composure. "I was honest about my circumstances, Mr. Wilson. I told you I was a seamstress who lost her position. You didn't mention you were arriving with nothing but a satchel." His voice hardened. A man in my position needs a wife who can help elevate his standing, not someone who will be another mouth to feed and another expense to bear. The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. She had known coming west was a risk, but she hadn't expected such a cold assessment of her worth based solely on her material possessions. I have skills, Mr. Wilson. I can sew, keep accounts. Skills I can hire for less than the cost of supporting a wife, he cut in. I'm sorry if this seems cruel, Miss Barnes, but I must think practically. I need capital to expand my herd. The drought last summer set me back, and he stopped himself, as if realizing he was revealing too much about his own financial concerns. Outside the window, a group of men passed by, laughing loudly. Two of them glanced inside, their eyes landing on Eleanor and Matthew, their curiosity evident. One nudged the other and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Word traveled. Fast in small towns, Eleanor realized. Already they knew who she must be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I've already paid for the announcement in the church bulletin, Matthew continued, lowering his voice. Folks have been congratulating me, but under the circumstances, you wish to rescind your proposal, Eleanor stated flatly. I think it would be best. He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I can provide you with enough money for a return ticket to Philadelphia. Eleanor's fingernails dug into her palms beneath the table. And what would I return to, Mr. Wilson? I gave up my room. I sold what little furniture I owned. A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by resolve. That's not my concern, Miss Barnes. I made no promises about accepting you regardless of your circumstances. No, you merely implied it with every letter. She could feel the stares of the other patrons now, the weight of their judgment and curiosity. What will you tell them? She nodded toward the window, where more townsfolk were passing by, some slowing to peek inside. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. The truth, that there was a misunderstanding. The truth, Eleanor repeated, her voice barely audible. That I'm too poor to be worthy of becoming Mrs. Wilson. His jaw clenched. I have a reputation in this town, Miss Barnes. A standing. I can't appear foolish. No, she agreed, a strange calm settling over her, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Better that I appear foolish instead, the desperate woman who came west with nothing but a satchel and misplaced hope. Matthew opened his mouth to reply, but the cafe door swung open and a boisterous group of men entered, ranch hands by the look of them, dust-covered and loud after a day's work. One of them spotted Matthew and raised a hand in greeting. "Wilson! There you are!" The man approached their table, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. His eyes moved to Eleanor, curious. "This, the mail-order bride we've been hearing about?" Eleanor stiffened at the crude description. Matthew stood abruptly. "Not now, Jenkins." But Jenkins was already extending a hand to Eleanor. "Welcome to Clearwater, ma'am. You sure traveled a long way. When's the wedding?" The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on their table. Eleanor saw the panic in Matthew's face, the desperation to avoid public embarrassment. "There won't be a wedding," Matthew said tightly. "There's been a misunderstanding." Jenkins looked between them, confusion clear on his weathered face. "Misunderstanding? What kind of—" "The kind where I expected a bride with means, not a beggar with a satchel," Matthew snapped, his composure finally breaking under the pressure of public scrutiny. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Eleanor sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. She had endured much in her 26 years, the loss of her parents, poverty, the countless small humiliations that came with being a woman alone in the world, but never had she felt so utterly exposed, so completely stripped of dignity. With mechanical precision she stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her satchel. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't trouble you further." Without waiting for response, she walked out of the cafe, past the staring faces, into the harsh sunlight of a Montana afternoon. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting, Matthew's voice rising defensively. Eleanor didn't look back. She walked down the main street, her mind racing. She had exactly 23 cents in her pocket. Not enough for a room, not enough for a meal, certainly not enough for a ticket back east. The sun beat down mercilessly, as if to emphasize the bleakness of her situation. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country, she stopped. Miles of grassland stretched before her, dotted with distant cattle and the occasional homestead. This was the West she had dreamed of, the open possibility of it. Now just another cruel reminder of all she couldn't have. A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat politely before continuing on. Eleanor watched it disappear down the dusty road, then turned and began walking again, this time away from town. She had no destination in mind, only the blind need to escape the whispers and stares. "I won't cry," she told her reflection firmly. "Not for him, not for any of it." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Eleanor looked up to see storm clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving steadily closer. Perfect, she thought with grim humor. A fitting end to a disastrous day. She should find shelter, she knew. But where? Return to Clearwater and face the humiliation again. Sleep beneath a tree and hope the storm passes quickly. As the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, splashing into the creek and dotting her grey dress with darker patches, Eleanor realized that for the first time in her life she had no plan, no next step to take. She had gambled everything on Matthew Wilson's promise of a future, and she had lost. The rain came harder now, soaking through her thin dress. Eleanor gathered her satchel and stood, scanning the landscape for any sign of shelter. Through the curtain of rain, she noticed what appeared to be a barn or outbuilding on a distant hillside. With no better option available, she began walking toward it, each step a battle against the increasingly muddy ground. The storm intensified, wind driving the rain sideways. Eleanor's dress clung to her like a second skin, her hair plastered. To her face, lightning cracked overhead, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. She quickened her pace, slipping and stumbling up the hillside. As she drew closer, she could see that the structure was indeed a barn, old but solid-looking, attached to a modest ranch house set back among a stand of pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. Despite the summer season, someone was home, cooking perhaps. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of the property. She had no desire to face more rejection today, but the storm left her little choice. She would ask only for temporary shelter, in the barn until the worst of the weather passed. Surely no one would be heartless enough to refuse such a basic kindness. With that thin hope clutched tight, she made her way to the barn door, each step taking her further from the life she had planned and closer to whatever waited ahead. Its shelter from the storm, or yet another door closed in her face. The rain hammered against Eleanor's shoulders as she approached the weathered barn door. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the structure in harsh white light before plunging it back into the grey shroud of the storm. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the wooden latch. The door finally gave way with a groan of protest, and she stumbled inside. The sudden absence of rain was disorienting. Eleanor stood dripping on the packed dirt floor, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dimness. The air smelled of hay, leather and animals, earthy and strangely comforting after her ordeal. "Hello?" she called softly, not wanting to startle anyone who might be inside. Only the shifting of horses in their stalls and the drumming of rain on the roof answered her. Eleanor moved deeper into the barn, her sodden boots leaving dark impressions on the ground. The structure was larger than it had appeared from outside, with 6 stalls on each side and a hayloft above. 4 of the stalls contained horses, fine-looking animals that watched her with mild curiosity. This was no modest homestead, she realized. The quality of the barn alone spoke of prosperity. But unlike Matthew Wilson's carefully manicured ranch house, which she had glimpsed from the stage on her arrival, this place had a lived-in quality. Tools hung in practical, accessible places. Rather than for show, harnesses were well-oiled, but bore the marks of regular use. Eleanor sank onto a bale of hay, her legs finally giving out. The events of the day crashed over her in waves. The journey's end, Matthew's cold dismissal, the public humiliation, the long walk to nowhere, and now this desperate shelter-seeking. She had never felt so utterly alone. A sob rose in her throat, but she forced it back. Crying wouldn't improve her situation. She needed to think, to plan. But the gentle rhythm of the rain and the warm dimness of the barn conspired against her determination. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs and clouded her mind. Just a moment's rest, she whispered to herself, laying her head against her satchel. Then I'll figure out what to do next. Her eyes drifted closed as the storm continued its assault outside. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" The voice penetrated. Eleanor's fog of sleep, deep and concerned. She jerked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. A man stood over her, his features shadowed by the lantern he held aloft. I'm sorry," she stammered, scrambling to sit upright. "I didn't mean to trespass. The storm—" "Easy now," the man said, setting the lantern on a nearby post. "No one's accusing you of anything." As he moved into the light, Eleanor could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against a simple work shirt rolled to the elbows. His face was tanned from long days outdoors, with lines at the corners, of eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. A short beard, neatly trimmed, covered a strong jaw. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples. "Nathan Blackwood," he introduced himself, not offering his hand, but instead keeping a respectful distance. "This is my ranch you've wandered onto." "Eleanor Barnes," she replied, smoothing her dress in a futile attempt at dignity. The fabric was still damp and hopelessly wrinkled. "I truly am sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Blackwood. I was caught in the storm with nowhere to go." His eyes, a surprising shade of grey, assessed her with frank curiosity. "You're a long way from anywhere. To be out walking in this weather, Miss Barnes." There was no accusation in his tone, just a simple observation that nevertheless demanded an explanation. Eleanor hesitated. The truth was humiliating, but she was beyond pride at this point. "I arrived in Clearwater today. My arrangements fell through. I found myself without accommodation or means to secure any." Understanding dawned in Nathan's expression. "You're the woman Wilson sent for." Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. "Word travels fast." "Small towns," he said with a slight shrug. "Not much stays secret for long." Eleanor reached for her satchel, moving to stand. "I'll be on my way, Mr. Blackwood. The rain has let up and I've imposed enough." "Where exactly do you plan to go at this hour, Miss Barnes?" he asked, making no move to stop her, but clearly skeptical of her plan. "It's nearly midnight. Clearwater's 4 miles back, and there's nothing else for 20 miles in any direction." Eleanor faltered. She hadn't realized she'd slept so long. The storm had indeed quieted to a gentle pattern, but the darkness outside the barn door was absolute. I don't know," she admitted, the simple truth of those 3 words devastating in their finality. Nathan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within him. "My house isn't much," he said finally, "but there's a spare room with a bed, and I've got stew on the stove. You look like you could use both." Eleanor stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate need. "Why would you help me?" Because it's raining, you're stranded, and I'm not. In the habit of sending people into the night with nowhere to go. He picked up the lantern. It's just shelter and food, Miss Barnes. Nothing more complicated than that. The simplicity of his answer, free from pity or ulterior motive, decided her. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I accept your hospitality. He nodded once, then turned toward the barn door. Follow me. Watch your step. The yard turns to mud, something awful after a storm. Outside, the world was draped in the hushed aftermath of rain. The clouds had broken in places, allowing glimpses of a star-studded sky. The air smelled clean and new, carrying the scent of wet pine and prairie grass. The house stood approximately 50 yards from the barn, a substantial log structure with a covered porch, wrapping around two sides. Light glowed from several windows, warm and inviting against the night. As they approached, Eleanor could see flower boxes beneath the front windows, filled with what looked like herbal plants rather than decorative blooms. Nathan led her up the porch steps and held the door open. Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must appear and the impropriety of entering a bachelor's home at such an hour. But the alternative was unthinkable, and so she stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, a cooking pot suspended over the glowing embers. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that appeared well read. The furniture was solid and practical. A sturdy table, with 4 chairs, a writing desk near a window, 2 armchairs positioned by the fire. Everything was clean and orderly, with none of the haphazard disarray one might expect in a bachelor's household. "You can warm yourself by the fire," Nathan said, indicating one of the armchairs. "I'll find you something dry to wear." "You have women's clothing?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed his face. "My sister stayed with me for a time. She left some things behind." Before Eleanor could respond, he disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a bundle of fabric. "These should fit well enough for tonight," he said, offering her the clothes, a simple cotton nightgown and a flannel robe. The spare room is the second door on the right. There's a washstand with fresh water. Get changed, and I'll have some food ready when you return. Eleanor accepted the garments, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." The spare room was small but meticulously clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over the moonlit landscape. Eleanor quickly washed the trail dust from her face and hands, then changed into the borrowed nightgown. It was slightly large, but blessedly dry. The flannel robe, faded from many washings, enveloped her in unexpected warmth. She hesitated, uncertain about rejoining her host in such informal attire, but the rumbling of her empty stomach decided the matter. With as much dignity as she could muster, she made her way back to the main room. Nathan was at the fireplace, ladling stew into bowls. He had removed his boots and outer shirt, standing now in trousers and a simple Henley that revealed forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He glanced up as she entered. "Better?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, self-consciously pulling the robe tighter. "Much, thank you." "Sit," he said, indicating the table where he'd already set places for 2. "The stew isn't fancy, but it's filling." Eleanor took a seat, watching as he placed a steaming bowl before her, along with a thick slice of bread and a mug of coffee. The aroma of the food made her mouth water embarrassingly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. A dry biscuit. On the stagecoach that morning, perhaps. Nathan took the seat across from her, though he made no move to begin eating. After a moment of confusion, Eleanor realized he was waiting for her to take the first bite. The simple courtesy brought a lump to her throat after a day of callous treatment. The stew was indeed simple. Beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs. But to Eleanor's hunger-sharpened senses, it was ambrosia. She ate slowly, mindful of appearances even in her famished state, but it took considerable willpower not to wolf down the entire bowl. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the occasional pop from the fireplace and the soft clink of spoons against bowls. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence which surprised Eleanor. After the tumultuous events of the day, this quiet moment with a stranger felt oddly peaceful. "May I ask what happened in town?" Nathan finally said, breaking the silence. "I only heard fragments from Jenkins when he stopped by to deliver some fence wire." Eleanor set down her spoon. Her appetite suddenly diminished despite her hunger. "I'm sure you heard enough." "I'd rather hear it from you," he said simply. She met his gaze, across the table, searching for signs of morbid curiosity or judgment. She found neither, only patient attention. "I answered Mr. Wilson's advertisement for a bride," she began, the words difficult to form. "We exchanged letters for 4 months. He seemed kind, thoughtful. He knew I was a seamstress who had lost my position. I was transparent about my circumstances." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "But when I arrived with only my satchel, it became clear he had expected someone with more substantial means, someone who could contribute financially to his ranch. And he rejected you publicly," Nathan stated, rather than asked, his voice neutral. "Yes." The humiliation of the scene in the cafe burned fresh in her memory. In front of half the town, it seemed, Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Wilson always did put appearances above substance. The comment suggested a history between the two men, but Eleanor didn't press. Her situation was precarious enough without involving herself in local feuds. "In any case," she continued, "I found myself with nowhere to go and very little money. I walked until the storm caught me, and your barn seemed the safest option." 4 miles in those shoes, Nathan observed, glancing at her worn boots drying. "By the fire. That couldn't have been easy." Eleanor managed a wan smile. "I've endured worse." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because Nathan's expression softened with recognition, the understanding of someone who had also weathered life's harsher seasons. "What will you do now?" he asked after a moment. It was the question Eleanor had been avoiding since walking out of that cafe, the question that loomed like a mountain before her, impossible to scale. "I don't know," she admitted, the words painful in their honesty. "I have 23 cents to my name. Not enough for a room, certainly not enough for a ticket back east, and there's nothing to return to anyway." She hadn't meant to reveal quite so much, but exhaustion had lowered her defenses. She straightened her shoulders, unwilling to appear as destitute as she felt. "I'll find work, I suppose. I'm a skilled seamstress. Perhaps someone in town needs—" "Not in Clearwater," Nathan interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact rather than unkind. "The only women's work to be had is at the saloon or taking in laundry for the miners. And after today, you'll find few willing to hire you." "Because I was rejected?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "Because people take Wilson's word as gospel around here," Nathan replied. "He's on the town council, has the ear of the mayor. If he says you're not good enough for him, folks will wonder why they should think differently." The unfairness of it stung. "I've done nothing wrong except be poor." "That's enough for some," Nathan said with a grimace, "and scandal is the lifeblood of small towns." Eleanor pushed her empty bowl away, the reality of her situation settling over her like a shroud. "Then I'll go elsewhere. Helena, perhaps, or with 23 cents and no references?" Nathan's voice remained gentle, despite the bluntness of his words. "Miss Barnes, I don't mean to be unkind, but I've lived out here long enough to know how quickly the West devours the unprepared." "What would you have me do, then?" Eleanor asked, a flash of anger finally breaking through her careful composure. "Beg on the streets, sell myself. I survived Philadelphia's factories and boarding houses. I'll survive this too." Instead of bristling at her tone, Nathan seemed to approve of the spark of defiance. "I've no doubt you would, but there's a third option you haven't considered." Eleanor regarded him warily. "And what might that be?" "I need help around the ranch," he said simply. "The house, the garden, the accounts. I've been managing alone since my sister left, but it's wearing me thin. I can offer you the spare room, meals, and a small wage until you decide what you want to do next." Eleanor stared at him, searching for the trap in his offer. "You're proposing to hire me? As what, exactly?" "As a housekeeper, if you like. Or a ranch hand, or both." He shrugged. "I'm not particular about titles, just results. Why would you do this? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you walked 4 miles in a storm rather than stay where you weren't wanted. I know you fell asleep in a strange barn rather than compromise your principles. And I know that Matthew Wilson is a fool who values appearances over character." He rose and collected their empty bowls, carrying them to a wash basin near the kitchen area. "The offer stands for a week. You can rest, recover your strength, and consider your options. After that, if you want to leave, I'll drive you to Helena myself and give you enough to secure lodgings while you look for work." Eleanor was speechless. After a day of cruelty and rejection, this unexpected kindness was almost harder to bear. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Blackwood," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It's not charity. It's an exchange. Your work for room, board, and wages. Nothing more, nothing less." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, an owl called, its mournful cry punctuating the night's stillness. Eleanor considered her options, which were, in truth, virtually non-existent. "1 week," she said at last, "to determine if the arrangement suits us both." Nathan nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Agreed." He showed her back to the spare room, providing an extra blanket against the night's chill and a candle for light. "Sleep as late as you need," he said. "I'll be out checking the herd in the morning, but there's bread and preserves in the pantry for breakfast." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. "Mr. Blackwood?" He paused in the doorway, looking back. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not many would have done what you did tonight." A shadow of something, sadness perhaps or memory, crossed his face. "Get some rest, Miss Barnes. Tomorrow's soon enough to face the world again." With that, he closed the door softly, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt. 1 week. 7 days to decide her future, to determine if this unexpected haven was truly what it appeared to be. As she extinguished the candle and lay down, she found herself thinking not of Matthew Wilson's cruel rejection, but of Nathan Blackwood's grey eyes. Eyes that had seen her not as a pauper to be dismissed or a woman to be exploited, but as a human being worthy of basic dignity. Outside, the last remnants of the storm passed, and the Montana sky cleared to reveal a tapestry of stars. Eleanor Barnes, mail-order bride no longer, drifted into the first peaceful sleep she had known in months, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring, but, for the moment at least, safe from the storm. Morning light filtered through the curtains when Eleanor finally opened her eyes. For a moment she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, disoriented. Then the memories of the previous day crashed over her, the rejection, the storm, Nathan Blackwood's unexpected offer. She sat up slowly, taking in the spare room in daylight. What had seemed merely functional in the darkness now revealed subtle touches of care. A small vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a hand-carved wooden brush beside the wash basin, a quilt that upon closer inspection showed extraordinary craftsmanship. Someone had taken great pains with this room, despite its simplicity. Eleanor rose and went to the window. The view stole her breath. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer season. The land immediately surrounding the ranch house was a patchwork of gardens, corrals, and grazing pastures, where cattle dotted the landscape like chessmen on a board. A stream wound its way through the property, bordered by cottonwoods and willows that swayed gently in the morning breeze. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and smoke-stained buildings. A movement caught her eye. Nathan, astride a chestnut horse, riding between pastures. Even from a distance, she could see the easy way he sat in the saddle, man and animal moving as one across the landscape. He stopped to speak with another rider, a ranch hand, presumably, pointing toward a far section of the property before continuing on his way. Eleanor stepped back from the window, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightclothes and disheveled appearance. She washed quickly at the basin, then surveyed her own clothing with dismay. Her grey dress, hung to dry overnight, was clean enough but hopelessly wrinkled and still bore the travel stains from her journey. The thought of appearing before Nathan looking so bedraggled filled her with unexpected embarrassment. A knock at the door interrupted her fretting. "Miss Barnes," Nathan's voice came through the wood. "I've left some things outside your door that might be useful. Take your time coming out." Eleanor waited until his footsteps receded, then cracked the door open. On the floor sat a bundle tied with twine. She brought it inside and untied it with curious fingers. Inside, she found a dress of faded blue cotton, simple but well made, a clean chemise and drawers, thick woolen stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots that looked nearly new. Beneath these lay a comb, a small pot of what appeared to be hand cream, and a bar of lavender soap. Eleanor touched each item with wonder. The clothing was plain but practical, working clothes rather than finery, yet the thoughtfulness of including such necessities moved her deeply. She dressed quickly, finding that while the clothes were slightly large, they were not uncomfortably so. The boots fit surprisingly well. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. The woman who stared back looked capable, practical, ready to face whatever the day might bring. When she finally emerged, she found the main room empty, but a coffee pot warming on the stove and a cloth-covered plate on the table with a note beside it. 1 week, that was their agreement. 7 days to determine if this arrangement would work. But what exactly was this arrangement? Housekeeper, ranch hand, some combination of both? And what would happen when the week ended? Eleanor pushed these questions aside for now. Better to focus on the immediate, proving her worth, earning her keep, and considering her options one day at a time. After breakfast, she washed her dishes and surveyed the house. It was clean but clearly maintained by someone who focused on function over comfort. The shelves needed dusting, the floor a thorough sweeping. The kitchen area was organized but showed evidence of bachelor living, mismatched plates, utensils tossed in a drawer rather than properly sorted. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She found cleaning supplies in a pantry off the kitchen. Lye soap, beeswax, vinegar, rags, and brushes. Starting with the main room, she cleaned methodically, taking care not to disturb the placement of Nathan's possessions while removing months of accumulated dust. As she worked, she took note of the books on his shelves, volumes on animal husbandry and agriculture, but also history, poetry, and what appeared to be journals filled with handwritten notes. Not the library of an uneducated rancher, certainly. By mid-morning, she had swept and dusted the main room and kitchen area and was scrubbing the plank floor when a sound at the door made her look up. A woman stood in the doorway, middle-aged and sturdy, with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that took in Eleanor's appearance in one sweeping glance. "So it's true," the woman said without preamble. "Nathan's taken in Wilson's cast-off." Eleanor rose slowly from her knees, cloth still in hand. "I beg your pardon." The woman stepped inside, uninvited, closing the door behind her. "News travels." Fast around these parts. Everyone's talking about how you showed up on Matthew Wilson's doorstep with nothing but a carpet bag, got yourself rejected, and somehow ended up at the Blackwood Ranch before sundown. She crossed her arms. That didn't take long. Heat flooded Eleanor's face, partly from embarrassment, partly from anger at the insinuation. "I don't believe we've been introduced, Mrs. Mabel Fletcher. I do the washing for most of the ranches hereabouts, including this one." Her expression softened slightly. "Known Nathan Blackwood since he was a boy, which is why I'm here to warn you." "Mrs. Fletcher," Eleanor interrupted, her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "Whatever you've heard is undoubtedly distorted. Mr. Blackwood offered me temporary employment as his housekeeper after I was caught in yesterday's storm. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." Mabel's eyebrows rose. "Is that what he told you?" "It's what we agreed upon," Eleanor replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "For 1 week, after which I'll likely continue to Helena." Mabel looked pointedly at the clothes Eleanor wore. "Those are Sarah's things." Sarah, his sister, left 2 years ago after... She stopped herself. "Not my place to say. Point is, Nathan doesn't let just anyone wear her clothes." Eleanor set down her cleaning rag, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mr. Blackwood kindly lent me these until my own can be properly laundered. I'd hardly call that inappropriate." Mabel studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're not what I expected." "And what did you expect, Mrs. Fletcher? Someone looking to take advantage?" She gestured vaguely. "Pretty girl, desperate circumstances, wealthy bachelor. Wouldn't be the first time that story played out badly." Despite herself, Eleanor felt a grudging respect for the woman's bluntness. "I assure you, I have no designs on Mr. Blackwood or his property. As soon as I've earned enough for passage to Helena, I'll be on my way." Mabel's expression changed subtly, something like approval flickering in her eyes. "Well then, since you're here and cleaning anyway, I've brought Nathan's washing." She indicated a basket by the door that Eleanor hadn't noticed. "Where shall I put it?" The swift change in tone was disorienting, but Eleanor recovered quickly. "I'll take care of it. Thank you for bringing it along." Mabel nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Nathan prefers his shirts hung to dry, not folded wet, says they wrinkle less that way." With that peculiar piece of advice she departed, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts once more. She returned to her cleaning with renewed vigor, as if scrubbing the floors could somehow erase the town's gossip. By the time Nathan returned, the main living areas were spotless, his washing was hanging on the line outside, and Eleanor had started preparing a stew for the evening meal, using ingredients she'd found in the root cellar. "She was concerned for your reputation." "My reputation?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's rich coming from this town." There was a story there, Eleanor sensed, but now wasn't the time to pry. "Mr. Blackwood—" "Nathan," he interrupted. "If you're going to be living under my roof, even temporarily, Mr. Blackwood feels unnecessarily formal." "Nathan, then," she conceded. "I should make it clear that I have no intention of causing you difficulty. If my presence here is problematic, the only person whose opinion of this arrangement matters is you," he said firmly. "And me, I suppose. The rest can mind their own business." Eleanor wasn't convinced it would be that simple, but she nodded. "Very well." She gestured to the stew pot. "I hope you don't mind that I started dinner. I found some vegetables that I needed to use." "Not at all." He moved to wash his hands at the basin. "Though I should warn you, I've got 2 ranch hands coming for supper tonight. Saturday tradition, I forgot to mention it this morning." "Oh." Eleanor glanced at the pot. "I should add more potatoes then." "I can help," Nathan offered, already rolling up his sleeves. "Jacob and Emmett aren't particular eaters, but they've got appetites like wolves." They worked together in surprisingly comfortable silence, Eleanor chopping additional vegetables, while Nathan kneaded dough for biscuits. It struck her as odd that a bachelor rancher would be so comfortable in the kitchen, but she kept the observation to herself. "You're good with a knife," Nathan commented, noticing the uniform pieces of carrot she was adding to the pot. "Years of practice," she replied. "My mother taught me to cook when I was barely tall enough to reach the stove, and precision comes naturally when you spend your days cutting patterns for dresses." "You're a seamstress." "Was," she corrected. "The factory closed 6 months ago. I took in mending after that, but it wasn't enough to keep a roof over my head." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why you answered Wilson's advertisement." "Yes." She focused on her task, unwilling to revisit yesterday's humiliation. It seemed like the only option at the time. "No family to help? None living?" she said simply. Nathan didn't press further, a courtesy Eleanor appreciated. Instead, he changed the subject. "The garden needs attention, if you've any experience with growing things." "Some. We had a small vegetable patch behind our house in Philadelphia." She smiled at the memory. "My father was determined we should have fresh tomatoes, even with the factory smoke." "Did you succeed?" "Some years. The soil was poor, but he was stubborn." Her smile faded. "The influenza took them both in the same week. I sold the house to pay their debts." Nathan's hands stilled in their work. "I'm sorry." The simple words, spoken without pity, were somehow more comforting than all the elaborate condolences she'd received after her parents' deaths. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then, eager to move past the painful memory, "Tell me about these ranch hands who are joining us. Should I expect more scrutiny like Mrs. Fletcher's?" Nathan's expression lightened. "Jacob's been with me for 10 years. Emmett is only 3. Jacob might eye you suspiciously at first. He's protective of this place. Emmett will be too busy eating to notice much of anything." Eleanor laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had reason to laugh. "I'll try not to take offense." "They're good men," Nathan assured her. "Hard workers. Loyal. Like their employer," she observed. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "You speak of them with respect," she explained. "Not all ranchers do. They're not servants. They're the reason this ranch functions." He shaped the biscuit dough with practiced hands. That, and a fair bit of luck. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Nathan looked out the window. "That'll be them now. Should I introduce you as—" The question hung in the air, a courtesy she hadn't expected. How should she be introduced? As a temporary housekeeper, a stranded traveler? Each option carried implications she wasn't sure she wanted to navigate. The truth, she decided. Miss Barnes, staying temporarily and helping with the household in exchange for room and board. Nathan nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. Simple, direct. "I approve." The door opened without a knock, and 2 men entered, one older with a weathered face and salt and pepper beard, the other younger with ruddy cheeks and an open expression. "Something smells mighty fine, Nathan," the younger man, Emmett presumably, announced. Then he spotted Eleanor and stopped short, his eyes widening. "Jacob Emmett," Nathan said calmly. "This is Miss Eleanor Barnes. She'll be staying here for a time, helping with the house and garden. Miss Barnes, Jacob Thornton, and Emmett Davis." Jacob's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her with undisguised suspicion. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat but making no move to approach. Emmett, on the other hand, broke into a wide grin and extended his hand. "Pleasure, Miss Barnes. Never thought I'd see the day Nathan let a lady clean up this old place." Eleanor shook his hand, finding his enthusiasm oddly refreshing after the day's tensions. "Mr. Davis, I hope you're hungry. I've made plenty." "Always hungry, ma'am," he assured her with a wink. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. After an initial period of awkwardness, conversation flowed easily. Emmett was a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of his adventures before joining the Blackwood Ranch. Jacob remained reserved, but thawed noticeably when Eleanor asked intelligent questions about the operation of the ranch. "You know something about cattle, Miss Barnes?" he asked after she inquired about their breeding program. "Very little," she admitted, "but I believe in understanding the work that puts food on the table." Jacob nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Not many Eastern ladies think that way." "I'm not many Eastern ladies, Mr. Thornton." This earned her a rare smile from the taciturn foreman. "No, ma'am, I don't suppose you are." As the meal progressed, Eleanor found herself watching Nathan, the way he listened intently to his men, the respect with which he treated their opinions, the occasional dry humor that surfaced in his comments. He was nothing like the man she had imagined would rescue her from spinsterhood in Philadelphia. Matthew Wilson, with his fine clothes and practiced charm, seemed a pale imitation of manhood compared to Nathan's quiet strength. Not that she was comparing them as potential husbands, she reminded herself firmly. That dream had died on Clearwater's dusty Main Street. After dinner, the men moved to the porch to smoke while Eleanor cleared the table. Through the open window, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Town's talking," Jacob was saying, his voice low. "Let them talk," Nathan replied. "Wilson's not one to forget a slight," Jacob warned. "Helping a stranded woman isn't a slight." "Depends on who's telling the story," Emmett chimed in. Their voices dropped further, and Eleanor could no longer make out the words. She finished washing the dishes, trying not to dwell on the implications of their conversation. Whatever complications her presence might create, she would be gone in a week. A fleeting footnote in the story of the Blackwood Ranch. When the men returned inside, the conversation turned to ranch business. Eleanor excused herself, suddenly exhausted despite the relatively early hour. "Thank you for dinner, Miss Barnes," Jacob said formally. "Best meal I've had in months." "Yeah, no offense to Nathan's cooking, but you've got a real touch with spices, ma'am," Emmett added with a grin. Eleanor smiled. "Thank you both. It was a pleasure meeting you." Nathan walked her to the door of the spare room. "You did well with them," he said quietly. "Jacob doesn't warm to strangers easily." "They seem like good men," she replied. "You're fortunate to have such loyal help." "I am." He hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying more, then simply added, "Sleep well, Miss Barnes." "Eleanor," she corrected, surprising herself. "If I'm to call you Nathan, it seems only fair." Something flickered in his eyes. Warmth, perhaps, or approval. "Eleanor, then. Good night." As she closed the door behind her, Eleanor was struck by the strangeness of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been Matthew Wilson's mail-order bride, filled with hope for a new beginning. Now she was... what exactly? Temporary housekeeper to a man who seemed as wounded in his own way as she was. A charity case being given a week's reprieve before facing harsh reality again. She moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. The distant mountains were silver-tipped in the night, silent sentinels watching over the valley. The vastness of it calmed her somehow, putting her troubles in perspective. One day at a time, she reminded herself. One day at a time. 3 days passed with surprising swiftness. Eleanor fell into a rhythm at the Blackwood Ranch, rising early to prepare breakfast before Nathan headed out to work the cattle. Mornings were devoted to household tasks, cleaning, mending, baking bread that filled the cabin with a homey aroma that seemed to please Nathan more than he would admit. Afternoons found her in the garden, reclaiming it from the weeds that had flourished in neglect. On this particular afternoon, Eleanor knelt in the rich soil, transplanting seedlings from the small greenhouse attached to the barn. The sun warmed her shoulders through the faded blue workdress, and the breeze carried the scent of pine from the nearby woods. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and rolled her sleeves to the elbow, practicality winning over propriety. "You've got away with growing things," Nathan observed, approaching from the direction of the corral. He had been breaking, a young stallion all morning, and dust clung to his clothes and hair. Eleanor sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Plants ask for little, just consistent care and attention. She gestured to the rows of vegetables now standing in orderly formation. "It's satisfying work. You can see the results of your efforts." "Unlike cattle," Nathan said with a wry smile. "Ornery beasts that seem determined to undo a day's work in 5 minutes flat." Eleanor laughed, the sound coming more easily now than it had days ago. "The stallion giving you trouble? Nothing I can't handle." He offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. "But I could use some of that lemonade you made yesterday if there's any left." "There is." She brushed the soil from her skirt. "I'll bring it to the porch." They had fallen into this comfortable pattern, brief conversations throughout the day, shared meals, evenings spent on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. It was easy, this arrangement between them. Perhaps too easy, Eleanor sometimes thought, for something meant to be temporary. She was retrieving the lemonade from the root cellar when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the window, she saw a group of riders coming up the main road, 5 men led by a figure she recognized with a jolt of dismay. Matthew Wilson. Nathan had seen them too. He stood in the yard, his posture alert but not yet hostile as the riders approached. Eleanor set down the pitcher and moved to the door, anxiety pooling in her stomach. "Blackwood," Matthew called, reining in his horse a few yards from where Nathan stood. "Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit." "Wilson." Nathan's voice revealed nothing. "Don't recall the last time you rode out this way." Matthew dismounted, his movements deliberate. He was dressed more formally than the situation warranted, polished. Boots, a fine waistcoat beneath his riding coat, a watch chain gleaming in the sunlight, calculated to emphasize the contrast between his prosperity and Nathan's more modest circumstances. "Been busy," Matthew replied, his gaze sliding to Eleanor. In the doorway, "Miss Barnes, I see you found accommodation." Eleanor stepped onto the porch, determined not to cower. "Mr. Wilson, what brings you and your friends so far from town?" The men with Matthew remained mounted, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Eleanor recognized one as Jenkins, the man from the cafe who had witnessed her humiliation. Another wore a deputy's badge, though his youth suggested limited experience. "Heard you were staying out at the Blackwood place," Matthew said, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold. "Got concerned about your welfare." "My welfare?" Eleanor echoed, incredulous. "A single woman, alone at a remote ranch with a bachelor of—" He paused meaningfully. "Questionable reputation. Folks in town were worried." Nathan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Miss Barnes is employed here as my housekeeper. Nothing improper about that." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" One of his companions snickered. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. "I believe Mr. Blackwood has made the situation clear, Mr. Wilson. I'm earning my keep until I have sufficient funds to move on." "Very convenient arrangement," Matthew observed, "especially for a woman who arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on her back." He turned to Nathan. "Didn't figure you for a charity case, Blackwood." "And I didn't figure you for a coward." "Wilson," Nathan replied evenly. "Yet here you are bringing 4 men to back you in a conversation that could have been handled alone." Matthew's smile tightened. "Just be cautious. Your temper's well known in these parts." "Only to those who provoke it." Nathan crossed his arms. "State your business plainly. My time's valuable even if yours isn't." The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mr. Wilson reported concerns about the lady's situation, Mr. Blackwood. As an officer of the law, as—" "Wilson's errand boy," Nathan interrupted. "You've got no authority here, Dawson." Unless you've got a warrant or evidence of wrongdoing, the young deputy flushed. Well, no, but then this is trespassing, Nathan stated flatly. And harassment. Matthew stepped forward, his cordial facade slipping. You think you're untouchable out here, don't you, Blackwood? Town council might be interested to know you're harboring a woman of questionable virtue. Before Nathan could respond, Eleanor descended the porch steps, rage propelling her forward. Questionable virtue? Because I had the misfortune of putting my faith in a man who values money over character? Or because I accepted honest work instead of begging on the streets after you discarded me like unwanted baggage? Matthew blinked, clearly not expecting such direct confrontation. Now, Miss Barnes. No, she cut him off, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You rejected me publicly, Mr. Wilson, made me a spectacle, left me with nowhere to go. Mr. Blackwood offered me employment when you offered only humiliation. And now you dare to question my virtue. The men on horseback exchanged glances, seemingly uncomfortable with this turn in the conversation. Even Jenkins had the grace to look away. Matthew's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Miss Barnes. Blackwood isn't what he seems. Neither were you, she retorted. At least he's been honest from the start. Honest? Matthew barked a laugh. Did he tell you why his sister left? Why half the town won't do business with him? Did he tell you about the Logan property? Nathan moved with unexpected swiftness, grabbing Matthew by the front of his expensive coat. That's enough, Wilson. The other men immediately tensed, hands moving to their weapons. The deputy dismounted, his inexperience evident in his nervous demeanor. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to have to ask you to release Mr. Wilson, he said, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered pistol. For a moment, the tableau held Nathan's. Knuckles white against Matthew's coat, the mounted men waiting for a signal, Eleanor frozen in place. Then Nathan released Matthew with a slight shove, stepping back. Get off my property, he said, his voice low and dangerous. All of you. Matthew straightened his coat, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Showing your true colors, Blackwood, just like always. He turned to Eleanor. When you tire of playing housekeeper to a man with blood on his hands, Clearwater's not without charity. The church ladies might take pity on you. I don't need pity, Eleanor said coldly. Yours or theirs. Matthew shrugged and remounted his horse. Your choice, Miss Barnes, but don't say you weren't warned. He looked down at Nathan. Town council meets Tuesday. Might be discussing water rights to that stream that feeds your north pasture. Shame if the vote went against you. With that parting threat, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his companions following. The deputy lingered a moment longer, looking uncomfortable. No offense meant, Mr. Blackwood, he said quietly. Just doing my job. Your job is upholding the law, Dawson, Nathan replied. Not being Wilson's puppet. Your father would be disappointed. The young man's face fell at that, and he mounted hastily, spurring his horse to catch up with the others. Silence descended as the dust from the rider's departure settled. Eleanor became aware of her trembling hands and clenched them to stop their movement. Nathan stood rigid, staring after the retreating figures, tension radiating from every line of his body. Nathan, she said gently, using his given name deliberately, to break through his anger. What was that about? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was shuttered in a way it hadn't been since her arrival. You should probably start packing. The words struck like a physical blow. What? Wilson won't stop. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. He'll make good on his threats, to me and to your reputation. Better if you leave now, get ahead of whatever story he's spinning in town. Eleanor stared at him, disbelieving. You're sending me away? I'm trying to protect you, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Wilson has influence. He can make life impossible for both of us if he chooses. So we let him win, Eleanor challenged. I run away, proving whatever vile rumors he's spreading, and you... What? Lose your water rights because you dared to help me? Nathan's expression darkened. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me, she insisted. What did he mean about your sister, about the Logan property? For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. Let's go inside. This isn't a conversation to have standing. In the yard. In the house, Nathan poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept on a high shelf. He offered one to Eleanor, who accepted it without comment, despite never having touched spirits before. They sat at the table, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the plank floor. Sarah left 2 years ago, Nathan began after a long silence. She is my half-sister. Same father, different mothers. She came to live with me after our father died. He took a small sip of his whiskey. She was 17, willful, beautiful, like our mother had been. Eleanor waited, sensing there was more to the story. Matthew Wilson was 30 then, already established in town. He started, calling on Sarah, brought her gifts, took her driving on Sundays. His knuckles whitened around his glass. I didn't trust him. His interest seemed calculated. Our father had left her a small inheritance to be managed by me until she turned 21. And Matthew knew this, Eleanor guessed. Nathan nodded. I told Sarah my concerns. She accused me of trying to control her life, of being jealous of Wilson's success. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then one night she didn't come home. I found her at Wilson's ranch, distraught. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but she never spoke to him again. He hurt her, Eleanor said softly. It wasn't a question. In some way, yes. But she wouldn't say how, and I couldn't prove anything. Nathan's eyes darkened with old rage. A week later she announced she was going to Denver to stay with our aunt. I tried to convince her to stay, but... He trailed off. She needed to get away, Eleanor finished for him, from the memories, from the town's gossip. Yes, he took another sip of whiskey. Wilson spread rumors that I had driven her away out of jealousy, that I was controlling her inheritance for my own gain. It divided the town, those who believed him and those who knew me better. Eleanor thought of Mabel Fletcher's protective visit, of Jacob's loyalty. And the Logan property, what was that about? Nathan's expression grew more troubled. James Logan owned the property bordering mine to the east. Good water access, excellent grazing land. He was an old man, lived alone. We were friends of a sort. He had no family. He rose and moved to the window, staring out at the land, as if seeing the past play out before him. Logan died suddenly. Heart failure, the doctor said. In his will, he left his property to me. Wilson had been courting him as well, bringing him into town for council meetings, offering to buy his land. When the will was read, Wilson accused me of coercion, even suggested I might have had something to do with Logan's death. That's absurd, Eleanor gasped. Surely no one believed that. Some did, enough to create doubt. Nathan turned back to face her. The will stood. It was properly executed, witnessed by the town judge. But Wilson has been working against me ever since, blocking cattle sales, interfering with water rights, turning opinion against me wherever he can. And now he sees me as another weapon to use against you, Eleanor said, understanding dawning. My presence here gives him fresh ammunition. Precisely. Nathan returned to the table but didn't sit. So you see why it might be better if you left, not just for your sake, but for mine as well. Eleanor considered his words carefully. She had come to Montana seeking security, a place to belong. Instead, she had walked into a years-long feud and now found herself being used as a pawn in a game she hadn't chosen to play. The practical choice would be to leave, to take what little money she had earned and make her way to Helena, as planned. Start fresh, where neither Matthew's rejection nor Nathan's complicated past could touch her. but something in her rebelled at the thought. Running away had never been her nature, even when staying meant hardship. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked startled. "Did you not hear what I just told you? Wilson will do whatever he plans to do regardless," she interrupted. "My leaving won't stop his vendetta against you. It will only prove he has the power to disrupt your life whenever he chooses." "And what about your reputation? The gossip?" Eleanor gave a small, bitter laugh. "My reputation was compromised the moment I stepped off that stagecoach, Mr. Blackwood. I was judged and found wanting before I spoke a single word to Matthew Wilson." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't let his rejection define me then. I won't let his threats define me now." Nathan studied her face, something like admiration flickering in his grey eyes. "You're not what I expected, Eleanor Barnes." "No," she agreed, with a slight smile. "I imagine not." He returned to his seat, considering. "If you stay, it won't be easy. Wilson has a long reach in this county." "Few worthwhile things in life are easy," she replied. "But I won't stay where I'm not wanted. If you truly believe my presence endangers your ranch or your standing—" "It's not that," Nathan said quickly. "Your presence has been—" he searched for the right word— "valuable." The simple acknowledgement warmed her more than it should have. "Then I'll stay, at least until our week is concluded, as agreed." She straightened her shoulders. "And I'll face whatever Matthew Wilson chooses to throw at us." Nathan nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll need to be careful. Wilson doesn't make idle threats." "Neither do I," Eleanor said with quiet determination. "And I've survived worse than a small-town bully with an inflated sense of importance." A rare smile curved Nathan's lips. "I believe you have." He raised his glass slightly. "To standing firm." Eleanor lifted her own glass, the amber liquid catching. The late afternoon light. "To standing firm." They drank, the whiskey burning a path down Eleanor's throat and settling warmly in her stomach. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, bathing the land in golden light. The day's confrontation had changed something between them, a shared adversary, creating an unexpected alliance. Eleanor knew staying was risky. Matthew's veiled accusations and the deputy's presence had made that clear. But running had never solved her problems before, and she doubted it would now. Better to face whatever came next with dignity and resolve, and if part of her decision to stay stemmed from a growing attachment to this place and the man across from her, well, that was a complication she would examine another day. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with no sign of the previous day's tensions. Eleanor rose early, determined to maintain their established routine despite Matthew's ominous visit. She was kneading dough for breakfast biscuits when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Nathan emerged from his room, still buttoning his shirt. "Stay back," he warned, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted near the door. "Nathan," she protested. Surely Wilson wouldn't, but he had already opened the door, rifle held casually but ready. Instead of Matthew or his men, however, a young boy of perhaps 12 stood on the porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Got a telegram for Mr. Blackwood," the boy announced, holding out a yellow envelope. "Mr. Johnson at the office said." It was urgent. Nathan lowered the rifle and took the telegram, fishing in his pocket for a coin, which he tossed to the boy. "Thanks, Tommy. Tell your ma I said hello." The boy nodded, pocketed the coin, and raced back to his waiting pony. Eleanor watched as Nathan opened the envelope, his expression growing more troubled as he read its contents. "Bad news?" she asked when he finally looked up. "From my sister," he replied, his voice tense. "She's coming home, arriving on tomorrow's stage." Eleanor wasn't sure why this would be cause for concern. "Isn't that good news?" "Under normal circumstances, yes." He handed her the telegram. "But her timing couldn't be worse." Eleanor read the brief message. Arriving tomorrow's afternoon stage stop. Urgent matters to discuss. Sorry for short notice. All will be explained. Sarah. I don't understand, Eleanor said, returning the telegram. Why is this a problem? Nathan's expression was grim. Because Sarah hasn't been back to Clearwater since the incident with Wilson, because she knows nothing about you, and because urgent matters from my sister has never meant anything good. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. You think this has something to do with Matthew? I think it's too much of a coincidence that she's returning now, immediately after Wilson made his threats. Nathan folded the telegram and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Whatever the reason, we need to prepare. Sarah can be difficult. I should leave before she arrives, Eleanor said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. It would be easier. For you both. Nathan looked at her sharply. What happened to standing firm? That was before your sister's impending arrival, she pointed out. I won't come between family, Nathan. You're not, he insisted. Sarah left of her own accord. And whatever her urgent matters are, they won't change the fact that you have a place here for as long as you need it. The conviction in his voice touched her deeply. Are you sure? I'm sure. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. Eleanor, I meant what I said yesterday. Your presence here has been valuable, more than I expected. There was something in his eyes, something beyond the simple appreciation of an employer for a competent housekeeper, something that made her heart beat faster and her cheeks warm. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Nathan stepped back, clearing his throat. I should ride into town, see if I can learn anything more about Sarah's return, maybe talk to Judge Parker about Wilson's threats. Eleanor nodded, both disappointed and relieved by the return to practicalities. I'll have dinner ready when you return, and I'll prepare the spare room for your sister. You're sleeping in the spare room, Nathan pointed out. I can make up a bed in the storage room, she replied. It's small, but it will suffice for a few nights. Nathan frowned. That won't be necessary. Sarah can take my room. I'll sleep in the barn until we sort things out. But it's decided, he said firmly. I won't have you sleeping in a storage closet when there's a perfectly good bed available. Eleanor recognized the stubborn set of his jaw and conceded with a nod. Very well, but I'll still prepare your room for her arrival. Thank you. He reached for his hat and coat. I won't be long, and Eleanor? He paused at the door. Don't worry about Sarah or Wilson. We'll weather this storm together. With that promise hanging in the air, he departed, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the dough still waiting to be shaped into biscuits. She returned to her task, her mind spinning with possibilities and concerns. Whatever storm was, gathering on the horizon, she had made her choice to stand firm beside Nathan Blackwood. Now she would have to face the consequences, be they Sarah's arrival, Matthew's malice, or the growing feelings she could no longer ignore. Eleanor rose before dawn on the day of Sarah's arrival, unable to sleep with anxiety twisting in her stomach. She moved quietly through the dimly lit house, careful not to wake Nathan, who had returned late from town the previous evening with a troubled expression and little information. She lit the stove and began preparations for a substantial breakfast, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of cooking. By the time sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, she had fresh bread cooling on the counter, eggs and bacon ready to cook, and coffee brewing. Nathan emerged from his room, his hair still damp from washing. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. You didn't need to go to all this trouble, he said. Eleanor glanced up, offering a small smile. It helps me think, and we should both eat well before... She trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Did you sleep at all? A little. She turned her attention back to the eggs sizzling in the pan. Did you learn anything useful in town? Not about Sarah. He moved to pour them both coffee. But Wilson's been busy, called a special meeting of the town council for this afternoon. Topic listed as moral concerns within the community. Eleanor's hand faltered slightly as she served the eggs. He's not wasting any time. No, Nathan agreed grimly. He never does. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor used the time to study Nathan's face, the lines of worry etched around his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The thought of causing him additional difficulty with the town or his sister weighed heavily on her conscience. I could still go, she said quietly, setting down her fork. Take the morning stage to Helena. Be gone before Sarah arrives. Nathan's gaze snapped to hers. Is that what you want? No, she admitted, but it might be the simplest solution. Simple isn't always right. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Eleanor, I won't force you to stay in a difficult situation. If you want to leave, I'll understand. But don't do it just to spare me complications with Sarah or Wilson. The conviction in his voice steadied her. All right, I'll stay at least until we see what Sarah's visit entails. Relief flashed across his features. Good. And Eleanor, thank you for the breakfast, for everything you've done here. There was a warmth in his words that sent a flutter through her chest, but before she could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Nathan rose and moved to the window. It's Jacob, he reported. Earlier than usual. Eleanor cleared their plates as Nathan went to meet his foreman. Through the open window she could hear fragments of their conversation. Telegram from Anderson. Jacob was saying, Water Authority inspectors coming tomorrow. Wilson's work, Nathan replied, his voice hard. Right on schedule. Eleanor couldn't make out Jacob's response, but Nathan's voice rose slightly. They won't find anything irregular. We've always played by the rules. She was wiping down the table when Nathan returned, tension radiating from his tall frame. Problem? She asked. Just Wilson pulling strings, he replied, jaw tight. The territorial water inspector suddenly needs to examine our usage rights. Coincidental timing, wouldn't you say? Very, Eleanor agreed. Is it serious? Could be. The stream that feeds our northern pasture is crucial for the cattle. He raked a hand through his hair. If they restrict our access or rule against our claim... He didn't need to finish. Eleanor had learned enough about ranching to understand that water rights could make or break an operation, especially with summer approaching. What can I do to help? She asked simply. Nathan's expression softened. Just having someone else to shoulder this is... He paused, seeming surprised by his own admission. It helps. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Then Nathan cleared his throat. I should check the property lines before the stage arrives. Make sure everything's in order for tomorrow's inspection. Of course, Eleanor nodded. I'll finish preparing for Sarah's arrival. After Nathan departed, Eleanor threw herself into work with renewed determination. She swept and dusted Nathan's bedroom, putting fresh linens on the bed and arranging wildflowers. On the dresser, she scrubbed the kitchen floor until it gleamed, polished the stove to a shine, and put a stew on to simmer for dinner. Physical labor helped keep her anxiety at bay. But as midday approached, her nerves returned in full force. What kind of woman was Sarah Blackwood? Would she resent Eleanor's presence in her childhood home? And what urgent matter had brought her back to a place that held such painful memories? The answers would have to wait. Nathan returned from his property inspection just as the clock struck 2. He changed quickly into a clean shirt and joined Eleanor in the main room. The stage should arrive around 3, he said, his typical composure betrayed by the way he repeatedly checked his pocket watch. We should head into town. Eleanor smoothed her dress, the blue one from Sarah's trunk, now altered to fit her. slender frame. "Do you want me to come with you? Perhaps it would be better if I stayed here." "No," Nathan said decisively. "Better to face this head-on. Sarah will hear about you regardless. Better she meets you properly than relies on town gossip." The ride into town passed in tense silence. Eleanor couldn't help noticing how different this journey felt from her first arrival in Clearwater. Then she had been full of hope, imagining a future with a man she had never met. Now she rode beside a man she had come to admire deeply, uncertain what the coming hours would bring. Clearwater looked much as she remembered it, dusty, sparse, with the same sense of frontier impermanence. But this time she noticed how heads turned as they passed, how conversations halted and eyes followed their progress down the main street. Matthew Wilson's influence at work, no doubt. They tethered the wagon near the stage depot, a simple wooden structure with a bench outside where passengers could wait for departures. Several townsfolk milled about, ostensibly on afternoon errands, but clearly interested in the arrival of both the stage and Nathan Blackwood with the mysterious woman who had been staying at his ranch. Nathan offered his arm as they crossed to the depot, a public declaration that Eleanor was under his protection. She accepted it gratefully, holding her head high despite the whispers that followed them. "Quite the audience," she murmured. "Small towns," Nathan replied, echoing his words. From days earlier, not much stays secret for long. They took a position slightly apart from the others, Nathan's posture alert but outwardly calm. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed his tension. The wait seemed interminable. Eleanor found herself studying the faces around them, wondering which belonged to Wilson's allies and which might be neutral or even sympathetic to Nathan's position. The young deputy, Dawson, lounged against a hitching post nearby, clearly assigned to observe them. Finally, the distant rumble of wheels and the cloud of dust on the horizon announced the stage's approach. Eleanor felt Nathan stiffen beside her, his arm tensing under her hand. "It will be all right," she said quietly, surprising herself with the assurance. Nathan glanced down at her, a flicker of gratitude in his grey eyes. "Let's hope so." The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust and commotion. The driver secured the team while the attendant opened the door for the passengers. Two men disembarked first, a traveling salesman by the look of his sample case, and an older gentleman who was greeted enthusiastically by a woman Eleanor assumed was his wife. Then a slender figure appeared in the doorway, pausing to survey the gathered crowd. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same straight nose and determined chin as Nathan, though on a decidedly feminine face, framed by dark hair, styled in the latest fashion. She wore a traveling suit of deep burgundy, the quality of the fabric speaking of city prosperity. Sarah Blackwood had returned to Clearwater, and she looked nothing like the heartbroken girl who had fled 2 years earlier. Nathan moved forward, Eleanor a half-step behind. "Sarah," he called, his voice betraying nothing of his anxiety. Sarah's eyes found her brother, and a complex emotion crossed her features, relief, wariness, and something that might have been regret. "Nathan!" She stepped down without waiting, for the attendant's assistance, moving with the confidence of a woman accustomed to city life. Brother and sister stood facing each other for a moment, the tension almost palpable. Then Sarah smiled, a small, tentative thing, and Nathan pulled her into a brief, awkward embrace. "You look well," he said as they separated. "So do you," she replied, her gaze shifting to Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this be?" Nathan straightened. "Sarah, this is Miss Eleanor Barnes. She's been staying at the ranch this past week. Eleanor, my sister, Sarah Blackwood." Eleanor extended her hand, determined to make a good impression despite her nerves. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Blackwood. Your brother has spoken highly of you." Sarah's handshake was firm, her assessment frank and unabashed. Has he? How interesting. Nathan rarely speaks highly of anyone. She turned back to her brother. My trunk should be on top. I assume you brought the wagon? Of course, Nathan replied, moving to help the driver unload her luggage. Left alone with Sarah, Eleanor maintained her composure despite the younger woman's continued scrutiny. I've prepared your old room for you, she offered. I hope you'll find everything to your satisfaction. My old room, Sarah repeated, something unreadable in her tone. And where are you sleeping, Miss Barnes? The question's implication was clear. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. Your brother has been kind enough to offer me the spare room while I'm employed as his housekeeper. Housekeeper, Sarah echoed, arching one perfectly shaped eyebrow. How convenient for both of you. Before Eleanor could respond, Nathan returned with Sarah's trunk secured on his shoulder. Everything's loaded. We should get back to the ranch before dark. The ride home was strained, with Sarah seated between them on the wagon bench. She made polite inquiries about the ranch and the town, but avoided any mention of why she had returned so suddenly or what urgent matters she needed to discuss. As they passed the turnoff to the Wilson property, Sarah stiffened visibly. Is he still on the town council? She asked, breaking a lengthy silence. Nathan nodded grimly, and gaining influence by the day. Sarah's delicate jaw tightened, a gesture so reminiscent of her brother that Eleanor couldn't help but notice the family resemblance despite their different coloring. Some things never change. And some do, Nathan replied, his tone gentle but firm. You're not 17 anymore, Sarah, and this isn't the same town you left. No, she agreed, her gaze sliding briefly to Eleanor. It certainly isn't. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Sarah surveyed the property as they approached, her expression softening slightly. You've kept it up, she observed. The garden looks better than when I left. That's Eleanor's doing, Nathan said. She's got a way with growing things. Sarah glanced at Eleanor with renewed interest. Is that so? I could never get anything to thrive in this soil. Too stubborn, Nathan always said. The soil or you? Nathan asked, a hint of their old relationship surfacing in the gentle teasing. Both, Sarah admitted with a small smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to strikingly beautiful. Eleanor could understand why Matthew Wilson had pursued her, though she suspected her inheritance had been an even greater attraction. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, the stew Eleanor had prepared filling the air with savory aromas. Sarah paused in the doorway, taking in the polished surfaces, the fresh flowers, the general air of care that had been lacking during her last residence. It feels different, she said quietly. Less empty, Nathan supplied. Sarah nodded, then turned to Eleanor. You've done more than tend the garden, it seems. I enjoy creating a comfortable home, Eleanor replied simply. Your brother has been very kind to give me the opportunity. Sarah studied her thoughtfully, then seemed to come to some decision. I imagine you're both curious about why I've returned so suddenly. Nathan gestured to the table. Let's eat first, then we can talk. The meal passed pleasantly enough, with Sarah sharing stories of her life in Denver, where she had apparently secured a position as a clerk in a law office. Not the usual employment for a woman, she admitted, but Judge Franklin, Aunt Martha's neighbor, took an interest in my education. Said I had a mind for details. You always did, Nathan agreed. Even as a child you noticed everything. A shadow crossed Sarah's face. Not everything, not when it mattered. The mood shifted perceptibly. Eleanor rose to clear the plates, offering them privacy, but Sarah stopped her with a raised hand. Please stay, Miss Barnes. What I have to say concerns you as well, in a way. Eleanor resumed her seat, exchanging a puzzled glance with Nathan. Sarah took a deep breath. I received a letter from Mabel Fletcher 3 days ago. She mentioned that Nathan had taken in a woman, a mail-order bride, rejected by Matthew Wilson, and that Wilson was using it to renew his campaign against the ranch. Nathan's expression hardened. Mabel should mind her own business. She was concerned, Sarah countered. And rightly so. Wilson never needs much excuse to cause trouble. And you rush back from Denver because of town gossip? Nathan asked skeptically. Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded document. No, I came back because of this. She placed the paper on the table and smoothed it flat. Eleanor could see it was a legal document of some kind, with official seals and signatures at the bottom. What is it? Nathan asked, reaching for the paper. A notice of intent to claim, Sarah replied. Wilson is petitioning the territorial court to invalidate James Logan's will on grounds of undue influence. He's making another play for the Logan property, and by extension, control of the water rights to half your ranch. Nathan scanned the document, his expression growing darker with each line. He can't do this. The will was properly executed, witnessed by Judge Parker himself. Judge Parker is retiring next month, Sarah pointed out. His replacement is a man named Harrison, recently arrived from St. Louis, and coincidentally, a former business associate of Wilson's father. Convenient timing, Eleanor observed quietly. Sarah's sharp gaze turned to her. Very, just as it's convenient that Wilson suddenly has a witness claiming to have overheard Logan complaining that Nathan was pressuring him about the will. That's a lie, Nathan growled. James was my friend. He left me that land because he didn't want Wilson turning it into another showcase for his ego. I believe you, Sarah assured him, but it's your word against their fabricated witness, and with your current situation, she glanced meaningfully at Eleanor. My situation has nothing to do with this, Nathan snapped. Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. Nathan, I know you believe that, but Wilson is using Miss Barnes's presence here to paint you as morally compromised. He's telling people that if you'd take advantage of a vulnerable woman, you'd certainly take advantage of an elderly neighbor. Eleanor felt as if she'd been struck. That's why you came back, she said softly, to warn Nathan that I'm endangering his claim to the Logan property. Sarah had the grace to look uncomfortable. Partly, but also because I know Wilson. I know how he operates, how he twists the truth to suit his purposes. Her voice hardened, and I owe him some justice of my own. Nathan reached across the table to grasp his sister's hand. Sarah, whatever happened between you and Wilson, no, she cut him off sharply. We're not discussing that. Not now. She withdrew her hand and turned to Eleanor. Miss Barnes, I apologize if I seemed cold earlier. I needed to assess the situation for myself, to understand what kind of woman would choose to stay in such a complicated arrangement. And have you made your assessment? Eleanor asked, meeting her gaze steadily. A hint of respect flickered in Sarah's eyes. I believe I have. You're either very brave or very desperate, perhaps both. Sarah, Nathan warned. It's all right, Eleanor assured him. Your sister is right to be concerned. She faced Sarah directly. I was desperate when I arrived in Clearwater. I had nowhere to go, no means to support myself. Your brother offered me shelter and honest work when Matthew Wilson offered only humiliation. I stayed because it seemed the best option available to me. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But I won't stay if my presence jeopardizes your brother's property or standing. Sarah studied her thoughtfully. Noble sentiment, but it may be too late for that. Wilson has already set his plan in motion. Then we fight back, Nathan declared. I won't let him steal land that rightfully belongs to this ranch, and I won't send Eleanor away just because it might look better to some territorial judge. It's not that simple, Sarah argued. Wilson has connections, money, influence, and now he has a legal strategy that might actually work. What do you suggest, then? Nathan demanded. Sarah hesitated, glancing between them. There is one option that would neutralize part of his argument, a way to remove the question of impropriety. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach, suddenly understanding where Sarah was heading. Miss Barnes could leave, Sarah continued, confirming Eleanor's suspicion. Return east or continue to Helena as she planned. With her gone, Wilson loses one of his weapons against you. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Eleanor stared at her folded hands, emotions warring within her. The logical part of her knew Sarah was right. Her departure would simplify Nathan's legal battle. But the thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected ache in her chest. Nathan's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and controlled. "That's not an option," Sarah sighed. "Nathan, be reasonable. The ranch—" "I said no," he interrupted, an edge of steel in his tone. "Eleanor stays if she wishes to stay. I won't have Wilson dictating who can live under my roof. Even if it costs you half your water rights, even if it means financial ruin?" Sarah challenged. "Yes," Nathan said simply. The single word hung in the air between them. Eleanor looked up, meeting Nathan's gaze across the table. What she saw there, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper she hardly dared name, stole her breath. "There must be another way," she said softly. Sarah watched the exchange, her expression shifting from frustration to thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps there is," she said slowly. "A different solution entirely." Nathan turned to his sister. "What are you thinking?" A calculating smile spread across Sarah's face. "I'm thinking that Wilson's entire argument hinges on the impropriety of your living arrangement, on the suggestion that you're a man of questionable character who takes advantage of vulnerable situations." "Yes," Nathan agreed impatiently. "We've established that. So we removed that argument," Sarah continued, "not by sending Miss Barnes away, but by changing the nature of her presence here." Eleanor frowned. "I don't understand." Sarah's smile widened. "It's quite simple, really. If the concern is a single woman living unchaperoned with a bachelor, Sarah," Nathan warned, beginning to see where she was heading, "then the solution is to ensure she's no longer a single woman living with a bachelor." Sarah finished triumphantly. "You should marry her, Nathan," Eleanor gasped, heat flooding her cheeks. "That's absurd," Nathan finished for her, though his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor's face. "We can't just—" "Why not?" Sarah pressed. "It solves the immediate problem. Wilson can't claim impropriety if you're legally wed. The court would view it as a legitimate marriage rather than a questionable arrangement, and it strengthens your position as a stable, respectable landowner committed to building a life here." "You're suggesting we marry for convenience," Nathan stated flatly. "To outmaneuver Wilson, I'm suggesting you consider all options," Sarah countered, "including ones that might benefit you both beyond the immediate crisis." Eleanor found her voice at last. "Miss Blackwood, while I appreciate your creative thinking, marriage is hardly a solution to be proposed so casually. Your brother and I barely know each other." "You know each other better than most couples who enter arranged marriages," Sarah pointed out. "You've lived under the same roof, shared meals, faced a common enemy. That's more than many have when they wed." She leaned forward. "And don't tell me there's nothing between you. I've seen how you look at each other." "Sarah, enough," Nathan said sharply. "This is not a decision to be made tonight, over dinner under duress." His sister sat back, unperturbed by his tone. "Of course not. I'm merely presenting an option." She rose from the table. "It's been a long day, and I'm tired from my journey. We can discuss strategies further in the morning." With that, she bid them good night and retired to Nathan's room, leaving Eleanor and Nathan alone in a silence charged with unspoken thoughts. "I apologize for my sister," Nathan said finally. "She's always been direct." "It's all right," Eleanor assured him, though her heart still raced at the unexpected proposal. She's trying to help in her way." Nathan rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking exhausted. Help or meddle? With Sarah, it's often hard to tell the difference. Eleanor began gathering the dishes, needing physical activity to settle her nerves. "She's right about one thing. My presence here complicates your situation with Wilson and the property claim." Nathan joined her at the wash basin, taking a dish to dry. "My situation with Wilson was complicated long before you arrived, Eleanor. Don't take that burden on yourself." They worked in silence for a few moments, the simple domestic task a counterpoint to the turmoil of emotions between them. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked quietly. Eleanor set down the last plate carefully. "I'm thinking that I came to Montana seeking security and found chaos instead. I'm thinking that I've brought difficulty to a man who showed me nothing but kindness." She turned to face him. "And I'm thinking that your sister's suggestion, while shocking, is not as absurd as it perhaps should be." Nathan's eyes widened slightly. "Eleanor, not because of Wilson or the property," she continued quickly, "but because—" She faltered, courage failing her. "Because," he prompted gently, "because in less than a week, this place has begun to feel like home," she admitted softly, "and you have become important to me." Nathan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You've become important to me too, Eleanor. More than I expected, more than might be wise, given the circumstances." The confession hung between them, neither quite ready to reach for what it offered. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the windows, as if nature itself was unsettled by the evening's revelations. "We should sleep," Eleanor said finally. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Nathan nodded, though he made no move to step away. "Whatever we decide, Eleanor, know this. I won't let Wilson drive you away unless that's what you truly want. Not for my property, not for my reputation, not for anything." The conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket against the night's chill. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached out then, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was fleeting, yet it lingered on her skin like a promise. "Good night, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Good night, Nathan," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult within. As she prepared for bed in the spare room, Eleanor's mind whirled with the day's events. Sarah's return, the threat to Nathan's property, and most unsettling of all, the suggestion of marriage, a solution that should have seemed preposterous, but instead had planted a seed of possibility in her heart. Tomorrow, she would need to make a choice. Stay and fight alongside Nathan, whatever form that might take, or leave and remove herself as a weapon Wilson could use against him. Neither option was without cost. Neither path guaranteed happiness or security. But for the first time since arriving in Montana territory, Eleanor Barnes faced her uncertain future not with fear, but with a flickering flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. Morning arrived, with the soft golden light of early summer filtering through the curtains of Eleanor's room and gently drawing her from restless sleep. She had spent much of the night turning over Sarah's startling suggestion in her mind, weighing possibilities against practicalities, examining her own heart with unflinching honesty. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the grey one she had arrived in, now cleaned and mended with her skilled hands. Today would require all her composure, whatever decisions were made. She pinned her hair simply but neatly, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who gazed back at her seemed different from the hopeful bride who had stepped off the stagecoach just 1 week ago. Her eyes held a quiet confidence that had been missing before. The kitchen was empty when she emerged, though the stove still held embers from an earlier fire. A note on the table in Nathan's handwriting explained his absence. "Gone to meet with Judge Parker about Wilson's claim. Sarah accompanied me, back by noon." Eleanor was grateful for the temporary solitude. It gave her time to think, to prepare herself for whatever the day might bring. She stoked the fire, put coffee on to brew, and set about making a hearty breakfast that would keep until their return. As she worked, her mind continued its restless examination of her situation. Marriage to Nathan Blackwood. Just days ago, the idea would have seemed absurd, a desperate arrangement between strangers. But now she knew the steadiness of his hands as he worked, the quiet intelligence behind his grey eyes, the unwavering fairness with which he treated those around him. She knew, too, the growing warmth in her chest whenever he entered a room, the ease she felt in his presence, the respect that had blossomed between them. These weren't the flutterings of romantic fantasy that had led her to answer Matthew Wilson's advertisement. They were something sturdier, built on the foundation of shared adversity and mutual regard. But was it enough? Could a marriage founded on practical necessity ever grow into something more? And even if the feelings between them were real, would she always wonder if he had married her merely to secure his property? Eleanor was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't hear the approaching rider until he was nearly at the door. She smoothed her dress and moved to the window, expecting to see Nathan returning early. Instead, the sight of Matthew Wilson dismounting alone in the yard sent a chill down her spine. She hesitated, considering her options. She could bar the door, wait for his departure. But that would be cowardice, and Eleanor Barnes had not survived poverty and disappointment by hiding from unpleasant confrontations. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door before he could knock, standing firmly in the threshold to prevent his entry. "Mr. Wilson," she greeted him coolly, "what brings you to the Blackwood Ranch?" Matthew appeared momentarily taken aback by her direct approach. He removed his hat, a gesture of politeness that did nothing to soften the calculation in his eyes. "Miss Barnes," he replied, his voice smooth as oil, "I hoped we might have a conversation, without Blackwood's interference this time." "Nathan isn't here," she informed him, making no move to invite him inside. "I know. I saw him and Sarah in town." A faint smile played on his lips. "Did you know she was returning?" "I was here when she arrived yesterday," Eleanor stated, unwilling to engage in his games. "Please state your business, Mr. Wilson. I have work to attend to." He studied her, seeming to reassess his approach. "You've changed since we met at the cafe, gained some backbone." "I've always had backbone, Mr. Wilson. You simply never took the time to notice." His smile tightened. "Very well. Direct approach, then. I've come to make you an offer." Eleanor raised an eyebrow but said nothing. $500, he said. "Cash. Enough to start a new life anywhere you choose. Denver, San Francisco, even back east if you prefer." "In exchange for what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your immediate departure from Clearwater and the Blackwood Ranch," he replied. "Today, without farewell or explanation to Nathan." The audacity of his offer momentarily stunned her. "You want to pay me to disappear?" "I want to help you start fresh," he corrected smoothly. "Away from a situation that can only bring you grief and scandal." Eleanor crossed her arms. "How generous. And I suppose this has nothing to do with your claim against Nathan's property?" Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, surprise perhaps that she knew about the legal challenge. "You're an intelligent woman, Miss Barnes. You must see that your presence here complicates Blackwood's position, so you've said before. What I'm offering is a solution that benefits everyone," he continued. "You get the fresh start you came west seeking. Blackwood preserves what reputation he has left. And He paused. "And you get to continue your campaign against Nathan without me in the way," Eleanor finished for him. Matthew's facade of benevolence slipped slightly. "This isn't personal, Miss Barnes. It's business. The Logan property should have been mine. Blackwood manipulated an old man into changing his, well, Is that what you tell yourself? Eleanor challenged. That your vendetta against Nathan is merely business? That your pursuit of Sarah was just business too? His expression hardened at the mention of Sarah. You know nothing about that. I know enough, Eleanor replied. I know you pursued a 17-year-old girl for her inheritance. I know something happened that drove her from her home. And I know you've been trying to destroy her brother ever since... Matthew stepped closer, his charm evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. Be careful, Miss Barnes. You're choosing sides in a battle you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she countered, refusing to be intimidated. You're a man who believes everything, and everyone has a price, who uses wealth and influence to take what isn't freely given. She leveled her gaze at him. But I'm not for sale, Mr. Wilson. Not for $500. Not for any amount. For a moment, raw anger contorted his handsome features. Then, with visible effort, he composed himself. Noble sentiment. But consider this. Blackwood can't win against me. The territorial court will side with my claim. Judge Harrison is already amenable to reviewing the Logan will. And your point is, when Blackwood loses that water, this ranch fails. He gestured expansively at the property around them. No water, no cattle, no income. How long? Before he's forced to sell? Where will you be then, Miss Barnes? Back to being penniless and desperate, I imagine. The brutal, practical reality of his words struck home, but Eleanor refused to show it. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Matthew studied her closely. You care for him, he observed, sounding almost surprised. After just a week, he shook his head. How quickly we replace one dream with another. The casual cruelty of the remark stung, but Eleanor maintained her composure. Is there anything else, Mr. Wilson? Or have you finished attempting to bribe and threaten me for one day? He replaced his hat, his expression cooling to businesslike detachment. The offer remains open until sundown, Miss Barnes. $500. Cash, no questions asked. He turned toward his horse, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. You might want to ask Sarah about her time in Denver. About why she really came back. Might be illuminating. With that parting shot, he mounted and rode away, leaving Eleanor standing in the doorway, unsettled by both his offer and his cryptic final comment. What did he know about Sarah's time in Denver? Was it merely another manipulation? Or something more significant? She returned to the kitchen, her earlier calm shattered. Matthew's visit had forced her to confront realities she had been avoiding. The precariousness of Nathan's situation, the uncertainty of her own future, the complex web of history and animosity that had entangled them all. $500. The sum was substantial. Enough to establish herself comfortably in a new city, to buy decent clothing, to rent a respectable room while securing employment. A year ago, such an offer would have seemed like salvation, but now it felt like 30 pieces of silver, the price of betrayal. Eleanor was still mulling over Matthew's visit when the sound of Nathan's wagon announced his return shortly after. Midday, she composed herself, determined not to let Wilson's manipulations disturb the household further. Nathan entered first, his expression grave but not defeated. Sarah followed, her city clothes exchanged for a practical riding skirt and blouse that Eleanor recognized from the trunk in her room. "You've had a visitor," Nathan said without preamble, scanning Eleanor's face. Wilson, she shouldn't have been surprised that he noticed. The hoofprints would still be visible in the yard. "Yes, he left about an hour ago." Sarah's eyes narrowed. What did he want? Eleanor hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. He offered me $500 to leave immediately, without saying goodbye. Nathan cursed under his breath, his hands clenched into fists. The gall of... That man... It's actually quite clever, Sarah interrupted, her tone analytical rather than emotional. If Eleanor disappeared without explanation, you'd be distracted searching for her. It would weaken your focus on the water rights hearing. And suggest that I fled because our arrangement was indeed improper, Eleanor added, further undermining Nathan's character in the eyes of the court. Nathan looked between the two women, his expression softening. I take it you declined his generous offer. Of course, Eleanor confirmed, though he seemed quite confident you would lose the water rights regardless. Nathan and Sarah exchanged a look that Eleanor couldn't quite interpret. We just came from Judge Parker's office, Nathan explained. The situation is complicated. Judge Parker confirms that Wilson has indeed secured Judge Harrison's interest in the case, Sarah elaborated, removing her gloves and settling at the table. Harrison arrives next week to review the evidence. The good news, Nathan continued, is that Parker has agreed to present a formal statement supporting the validity of Logan's will before he retires. And the bad news? Eleanor asked, sensing there was more. Nathan sighed. Parker warned us that Harrison is known for his conservative views on property disputes. He believes land should be developed by men of means and vision. Men like Wilson. Eleanor translated. Precisely, Sarah confirmed. And there's another complication. Wilson's witness, the one claiming to have overheard Logan complaining about Nathan's influence, is Charles Dawson. The deputy's father? Eleanor asked, remembering the young man who had accompanied Wilson to the ranch. Nathan nodded grimly. Charles Dawson owes Wilson money. Gambling debts from what I hear. Convenient that he suddenly remembers a conversation from 2 years ago. Eleanor processed this information, trying to see a path forward. So, even with Judge Parker's statement, the odds remain against us. Us, Sarah repeated softly, her sharp gaze assessing Eleanor with renewed interest. You've decided to stay, then? Eleanor met her gaze steadily. I've decided not to be driven away by Matthew Wilson's threats or bribes. The rest, she glanced at Nathan, the rest depends on many factors. An unspoken current passed between them, acknowledgement of the choice still hovering on the horizon, the possibilities Sarah had raised the previous evening. Sarah looked between them, then rose decisively. I need to check something in my luggage. I'll give you two a moment. After she departed, an awkward silence fell. Nathan moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. I'm sorry about Wilson, he said finally. I should have anticipated he'd approach you directly. You can't anticipate every move he makes, Eleanor replied gently, and his offer was educational. Nathan turned to face her. Educational. It clarified some things for me, she explained, about what I value, what I'm willing to sacrifice, what I'm not willing to sell. He studied her face, searching for meaning behind her words. And what conclusions did you reach? Eleanor took a deep breath. That I don't want to leave, not because of Wilson's threats, not because of the money he offered, not even because I have nowhere else to go. She met his gaze directly. I want to stay, because in 1 week, this place has become more of a home to me than anywhere since my parents died. Because the work I do here matters. Because... She faltered, courage deserting her at the final hurdle. Because? Nathan prompted, softly, echoing their conversation from the previous evening. Because of you, she finally admitted. Because when I imagine leaving, it's your absence that hurts most to contemplate. Nathan set down his coffee cup and moved toward her, stopping just a breath away. Eleanor, he began, his voice rough with emotion. What Sarah suggested last night was outrageous, Eleanor finished for him. Impulsive, potentially scandalous. Yes, he agreed, a shadow crossing his features. And yet, she continued, her heart pounding, I haven't been able to dismiss it entirely, which frightens me more than Wilson's threats ever could. Hope kindled in Nathan's eyes. Why does it frighten you? Because marriage should be entered into with clear hearts and minds, not as a strategy against an enemy, not out of desperation or necessity. She held his gaze. If we were to consider such a step, I would need to know it was for the right reasons, that neither of us would harbor regrets. Nathan reached for her hands, enfolding them in his larger ones. Eleanor Barnes, in 1 week you have transformed this house into a home. You've faced down Wilson without flinching. You've worked alongside, as if you'd been here all along. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her wrists. I admired your courage from the first moment. I grew to respect your mind, your capabilities, and somewhere along the way I began to care for you in a way I never expected. Eleanor's breath caught. Nathan, let me finish, he said gently. Marriage, as Sarah suggested, as a strategic move, isn't what I want. But marriage to you based on mutual respect and growing affection, that's something I would consider a privilege, not a sacrifice. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up. Even knowing we've known each other for such a short time, even with Wilson's threats hanging over us? Especially then, Nathan replied. Some people spend years together and never truly know each other. You and I have faced more in a week than many couples face in years. I've seen your character tested by fire, Eleanor. I know who you are. The simple truth of his words resonated within her. She had indeed seen Nathan tested by Wilson's provocations, by the challenges of his ranch, by his sister's return. She had watched how he handled each with the same steady integrity, the same unwavering decency. Before she could respond, Sarah's voice broke the moment. I hate to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. They turned to find her standing in the doorway, a document in her hand and an expression of grim triumph on her face. What is it? Nathan asked, reluctantly releasing Eleanor's hands. Sarah approached the table, spreading out what appeared to be several pages of legal documents. Remember how I said I was working for Judge Franklin in Denver? What I didn't mention is that for the past year I've been gathering evidence against Wilson. Nathan stared at his sister. Evidence of what? Fraud, Sarah said flatly. Land, deals where he forged signatures, cattle transactions with falsified bloodlines, and most damning of all, she tapped one document with a slender finger. Proof that he attempted to bribe a territorial official last year to secure water rights. North of Clearwater, Eleanor leaned forward, scanning the neat legal language. How did you obtain these? Judge Franklin has connections throughout the territory. After... Sarah hesitated. After what happened with Wilson and me, the judge took an interest in his business dealings. When patterns emerged, he assigned me to organize the evidence. And you never told me, Nathan said, a hint of hurt in his tone. Sarah met his gaze squarely. I couldn't. Not until we had enough to act. Not until I was certain. She turned to Eleanor. That's the real reason I returned so quickly. Mabel's letter about Wilson's renewed campaign against Nathan convinced the judge it was time to move forward. Move forward how? Nathan asked. By filing formal charges, Sarah replied. Judge Parker signed the authorization this morning, after you left his office. The territorial marshal will be serving papers on Wilson tomorrow. The implications took a moment to sink in. Wilson is about to be charged with fraud, Eleanor said slowly, which means his claim against the Logan property becomes suspect, Sarah confirmed. Judge Harrison would be a fool to rule in his favor with these charges pending, and Wilson will be too busy defending himself to pursue his vendetta against Nathan or intimidate you. Nathan stared at the documents, then at his sister. Sarah, this is... I don't know what to say. A shadow of old pain crossed Sarah's face. You don't need to say anything. After what happened with Wilson, I ran away, left you to face the consequences of my naivete. This is my way of making it right. For the first time since Eleanor had met her, Sarah looked vulnerable, the sophisticated city woman replaced by a younger sister seeking forgiveness. Nathan crossed to her and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You never needed to make anything right," he said fiercely. "What Wilson did was never your fault." Sarah returned his embrace briefly, then stepped back, composing herself. "Well, regardless, his days of intimidating the Blackwood family are numbered." She glanced at Eleanor with a hint of mischief. "Though I stand by what I said last night, some good could come from this crisis if you two weren't so stubborn." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We were just discussing that when you interrupted." "Oh," Sarah's eyebrows rose with interest. "And what conclusions did you reach?" Nathan cleared his throat. "That's between Eleanor and me. For now." Sarah looked disappointed but didn't press. "Fine, keep your secrets. I need to ride back to town anyway. Judge Parker wants me to prepare some additional statements." She gathered the documents, carefully folding them into her satchel. "Don't make any important decisions without me." After she departed, Eleanor and Nathan found themselves alone again, the air between them charged with possibility. "Your sister is quite remarkable," Eleanor observed. "She always was," Nathan agreed. "Stubborn, meddlesome, but with a heart like a lion." He turned to Eleanor. "Where were we before she interrupted?" Eleanor smiled. "You were saying something about marriage not being a sacrifice." "Ah, yes." He stepped closer. "I believe I was about to ask if you might consider such an arrangement, not as a strategy against Wilson, not out of necessity, but because we found something worth building on." Eleanor looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt or reservation. She found none, only warmth, respect, and a tenderness that made her heart skip. "It would be unconventional," she said softly. "A marriage founded on just 1 week's acquaintance. We've never been conventional people," Nathan pointed out. "And I'd rather build a life with a woman of character I've known 1 week than spend years with someone I never truly see." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. "If we were to consider this," she said carefully, "I would want it to be a true partnership, not just in name." "As would I," he assured her. "You've proven yourself capable in ways many men aren't. We would build this ranch together, make decisions together, and if I sometimes miss the city, if I want to visit Denver or even Philadelphia someday, then we'll go," he said simply. "This land is important to me, Eleanor, but it's not a prison. It's a foundation on which to build a life, our life, if you want it to be." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a great precipice. Behind her lay the disappointments of the past, Matthew's rejection, the years of struggle after her parents' death, the desperate journey west. Before her stretched an unknown future, full of challenges but also possibilities she had never dared imagine. "Yes," she said finally, the word emerging with quiet certainty. "Yes, I would like to build that life with you, Nathan Blackwood." Joy transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had become so familiar. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel pressured by circumstances." In answer, Eleanor rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "I'm certain, not because it's practical, not because of Wilson, but because when I look at you, I see a future I want to share." Nathan's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle, as if she were something precious and fragile. "Eleanor Barnes," he said softly, "you arrived here with nothing but a satchel, and in 1 week you've enriched my life more than I thought possible." "Not nothing," she corrected with a smile. "I had courage, determination, skills you've come to value." "All that and more," he agreed. Then, with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that sealed their unconventional agreement. A kiss that spoke of respect, partnership, and the promise of deeper emotion to come. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in Judge Parker's office before he departed for retirement. Sarah stood as witness, her face alight with satisfaction at the culmination of her matchmaking efforts. Jacob and Emmett attended as well, the former gruffly emotional, the latter beaming with unrestrained delight. Matthew Wilson was conspicuously absent from Clearwater, having departed hastily for Denver to consult with lawyers after the fraud charges were filed. The town buzzed with the scandal, opinion turning swiftly against the man who had for so long dominated local politics and business. As Eleanor and Nathan exchanged vows, she wore not the grey dress of her arrival, but a new gown of soft blue, sewn by her own hands from fabric Sarah had brought from Denver. Around her neck hung a simple silver pendant, Nathan's gift, chosen with Jacob's assistance during a secret trip to Helena. I, Eleanor Barnes, take you, Nathan Blackwood, to be my lawfully wedded husband, she spoke clearly, her voice steady with conviction. To partner with you in all things, to stand firm through adversity, to build a home and a life worthy of the trust between us. The traditional vows had been modified by mutual agreement, reflecting the unique foundation of their union. Not blind romantic love, but clear-eyed respect and growing affection, tested by fire and found resilient. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch for a small celebration. Mabel Fletcher provided a wedding cake, her initial suspicions of Eleanor, long since transformed into grudging approval. The ranch hands organized an impromptu dance in the yard, the fiddle music carrying across the valley as the summer sun began its descent. As twilight softened the landscape, Eleanor stood on the porch watching the celebration, a sense of wonder washing over her. Just 3 weeks ago, she had arrived in Montana Territory with nothing but desperate hope and a matrimonial advertisement. She had been judged, rejected, humiliated, only to find unexpected sanctuary and ultimately a future. Far richer than the one she had imagined, Nathan joined her, offering a cup of cider. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice. Eleanor smiled, still growing accustomed to her new name. "Not one," she assured him. "Though I am thinking about curtains for the front windows and expanding the garden next spring, and perhaps a proper library shelf for your books." Nathan laughed, the sound warming her heart. "Already making plans, I see." "Many plans," she agreed. "This is just the beginning." He raised his cup in a toast. "To begin, and to the woman who arrived with a satchel and claimed an entire world." Eleanor clinked her cup against his. "And to the man who saw beyond appearances to value what truly matters." As the stars began to emerge in the Montana sky, Eleanor Barnes. Blackwood looked out over the land that was now her home, the rolling pastures, the distant mountains, the garden she had reclaimed from neglect. Matthew Wilson had rejected her for being too poor, seeing only what she lacked materially. Nathan had seen her courage, her determination, her worth beyond possessions. In doing so, he had indeed given her the world, not through wealth or status, but through partnership, respect, and the promise of a future they would build together, one day at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.